on our messy data for a minute and just talk about some common problems with values in our data. Okay, so let's talk about filling in zeros and when not to fill in zeros. So it might be that when you're measuring something, so in this case rainfall, we get a zero value. And you might ask the question, why is it important to write in the number zero in that column? For example, what if it's mostly zero? Let's just see if we have any data that looks like that. Yeah, no, we've only got a couple of points where there's zero. Okay, but there may be a time when we have many zeros in our data. So now, something that's really important is that there's a really big difference between a zero and a blank cell in a spreadsheet. So to the computer, a zero is actually data. So in this case, we've actually recorded no rain. And that's really important when looking at things like drought. Whereas a blank cell means that it wasn't even measured, and the computer will interpret this as an unknown value. We call these null values. So the spreadsheets or statistical programs will likely misinterpret blank cells when you intend them to be zero. So by not entering the value of your observation, you're telling the computer to represent that data as unknown or missing. Remember the keyword, the word we used before, null value. Then this can cause problems with subsequent calculations or analysis. For example, the average of a set of numbers, which include a single null value, is always null because the computer can't guess the value of the missing observations. So because of this, it's very important to record zeros as zeros and truly missing data as nulls. So, a problem that we have experienced with our data is this highlighted section in yellow, and we've got two of them. And we've put a little highlight block here, and we've written in some text saying that the yellow cells mean that the instrument hasn't recorded incorrectly. Now, if it hasn't recorded correctly, then remember we call this null data. So this is actually this zero and this zero in column C34 and G26 are actually null values. So what do we do about null values? Well, there are a few reasons. Well, we can represent null values with different values, and often we do that by something we call -999 or other numerical values. The best way to represent null values is to leave them blank. And that's, I think, all I need to say about that for now. But something that I just alluded to, which is quite important, is using the formatting to convey the information. So that is highlighting this in yellow. Now, just think about this. Does your computer, is it able to interpret that that yellow means that the cell hasn't been recorded properly? No, it can't, right? The computer can only see text. It can ascribe a color to something, but it can't make the connection that we are making when we look at that color. And that is problematic. So the best thing that we can do is actually create a new field. So in this instance, let's say no data. So we've made a new field. And everywhere where there's no data, we can just put a yes or a no, or a 1 or a 0. And something that, a common problem that people do, which you can see in our top line here, is we use the formatting to make the data sheet look pretty. So a good example is merging cells. So here I've merged row 1 for cells E, F, and G, and A, B, and C. Now, if you're not careful, formatting the worksheet to be more aesthetically pleasing can compromise your computer's ability to see associations in the data. Another common problem is putting comments or units in the cells. So for example, we would put 0, if we wanted to know, rainfall is normally measured in a volume per time, so we may put 0.2 millimeters per 5 minutes. Sorry, it's not a volume per time, it's a height. And this is problematic, so we don't really want to do that. And lastly, just another key point, if we want to add data about our data, we call this metadata in our table, it's really important not to add it into our spreadsheet. Remember in our one of our first videos, we had a little text editor where we wrote notes, and that is called metadata. So it's giving you data about the data that you see, and that's the best way to generally do things, is to keep the metadata separate from your data.